Sarah Martinez walked into the small music store on Main Street like she did every Tuesday morning. She had been teaching piano for 12 years now, and her students always needed new music books. The bell above the door rang as she entered, and Mr. Peterson looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Sarah," he said with a smile. "Got some new beginner books in yesterday." Sarah nodded and walked to the piano section. She loved the smell of the store, old wood, sheet music, and the faint scent of rosin from the violin strings. This place felt like home to her. She had bought her first piano book here when she was 7 years old. At 34, Sarah lived a quiet life in the small town of Millbrook. Every morning she woke up at 6 and practiced piano for an hour before her first student arrived at 8. She taught lessons in her living room until 3 in the afternoon. In the evenings, she played for the church choir or helped out with school concerts. People in town knew Sarah as the reliable piano lady. When someone needed music for a wedding, they called Sarah. When the high school needed an accompanist for their spring musical, they called Sarah. She never said no, and she never caused problems. She just showed up, played what was asked, and went home. Sarah's house was small but cozy. The living room had been turned into a music room with 2 pianos, an old upright that had been her grandmother's and a newer digital piano for teaching. Music books covered every shelf, and there were folding chairs stacked in the corner for when parents wanted to watch lessons. Her students ranged from 6-year-old Emma, who could barely reach the pedals, to Mrs. Wilson, who was 73, and learning piano for the first time. Sarah loved them all. She had endless patience and always found a way to make even the most difficult student feel successful. On this particular Tuesday morning in early October, Sarah was looking for a book of simple hymns. The church had asked her to put together a collection of easy songs for their new adult beginners class. She found what she needed and walked to the counter. "How's business, Sarah?" Mr. Peterson asked as he rang up her purchase. "Good," she replied. "I have a waiting list of students now. Might need to start teaching on Saturdays too." "That's wonderful. You're doing great work with those kids. My granddaughter still talks about the lessons she had with you last year." Sarah smiled. She remembered Katie Peterson well, a bright 8-year-old who learned Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in just 2 weeks. The girl had moved to another state with her family, but she still sent Sarah drawings of pianos in the mail. As Sarah left the music store, she noticed a flyer taped to the window. The Veterans Day Committee was looking for volunteers for their annual ceremony. Sarah had heard about this event but had never been involved. She usually spent Veterans Day quietly at home. Thinking about her grandfather who had fought in World War II, she stopped to read the flyer more carefully. They needed people to help with setup, cleanup, and program organization. At the bottom, it mentioned they were also looking for a pianist to accompany the ceremony. Sarah felt a little flutter in her chest. She had never played for such a big community event. That evening, Sarah sat at her grandmother's piano, running her fingers over the worn keys. This piano had been through so much. Her grandmother had played it during the Great Depression. Her mother had learned on it in the 1960s, and now Sarah played it every day. The keys were slightly yellow, and some of the wood was scratched, but it still had a beautiful, warm sound. Sarah thought about the Veterans Day flyer. She had always been comfortable playing for small groups. Church services usually had about 50 people, and the biggest school concert she had ever played for had maybe 200. But a townwide Veterans Day ceremony could have hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000. She shook her head. She was probably not the right person for such an important event. There were better pianists in the county, people who had studied at big universities and played professionally. Sarah had gone to the local community college and learned most of what she knew from her grandmother and YouTube videos. But the thought stayed with her. The next day, while teaching little Emma her scales, Sarah found herself thinking about it again. During her lunch break, she looked up the phone number for the Veterans Day Committee. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher answered on the second ring. She was the committee chairwoman and had organized the ceremony for the past 15 years. "Oh, Sarah Martinez," Mrs. Fletcher said when Sarah introduced herself. "I know you. You played beautifully at my nephew's wedding last spring. How can I help you? Sarah took a deep breath. I saw your flyer at the music store. You're looking for a pianist? Yes, we are. Our usual pianist moved to Florida last month, and we're a bit desperate. The ceremony is only 4 weeks away. What would you need me to play? Sarah asked. Nothing complicated, Mrs. Fletcher assured her. We usually do the Star-Spangled Banner at the beginning, Amazing Grace during the memorial part, and God Bless America at the end. Very traditional, very simple. We just need someone reliable who won't make a fuss. Sarah felt relieved. These were all songs she knew well. She had played Amazing Grace hundreds of times at church services and funerals. The Star-Spangled Banner was tricky with its high notes, but she could manage it. God Bless America was straightforward. I think I can do that, Sarah said. Wonderful. Can you come to our planning meeting next Tuesday at 7? It's at the community center. Sarah agreed and hung up the phone. She felt nervous but also excited. This would be the biggest audience she had ever played for. She spent the rest of the day practicing the 3 songs, making sure her fingers remembered every note. The planning meeting was held in the same room where Sarah taught her adult piano class once a month. About 12 people sat around a folding table discussing logistics. There would be a stage set up in the town square with microphones and speakers. The ceremony would start at 10 in the morning and last about an hour. Sarah will be playing from the upright piano we're renting, Mrs. Fletcher explained to the group. She's very experienced and reliable. Sarah felt a warm glow at the compliment. Mr. Johnson, who ran the hardware store, nodded approvingly. Good choice. We need someone steady for this kind of thing. They gave Sarah a schedule. She would play the Star-Spangled Banner while people stood and sang along. Then Amazing Grace during a moment of silence for fallen soldiers, and finally God Bless America as everyone filed out. Simple and straightforward. Over. The next 3 weeks, Sarah practiced every day. She played the songs until she could do them in her sleep. She was determined not to make any mistakes. This was too important. It was about honoring people who had died for their country. She would play exactly what was expected, nothing more and nothing less. The night before the ceremony, Sarah laid out her best black dress and polished her shoes. She went to bed early, setting 3 different alarms to make sure she wouldn't oversleep. Tomorrow would be the biggest performance of her life, and she was as ready as she would ever be. Sarah woke up at 6 in the morning on Veterans Day. Even though her first alarm was set for 7, she had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself sitting at a piano in front of hundreds of people. In her dreams, she sometimes forgot the words to the Star-Spangled Banner, or her fingers froze on the keys during Amazing Grace. She got up and made coffee with shaking hands. The weather looked perfect outside, clear blue sky and cool autumn air. It was the kind of November morning that made everything look crisp and clean. Sarah tried to eat toast for breakfast, but her stomach felt too nervous. Instead, she sat at her grandmother's piano and played through her 3 songs one more time. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar melodies. She had practiced these songs so many times in the past month that they felt like old friends, but today they would mean something different. Today, they wouldn't just be practice, they would be part of something important. At 8:30, Sarah drove to the town square. She had never seen so many people there before. Volunteers were setting up rows and rows of folding chairs on the grass. A small stage had been built near the Civil War memorial statue, and Sarah could see her piano waiting for her, an old upright painted black, with a microphone positioned near the sound holes. Mrs. Fletcher spotted Sarah immediately and hurried over. She was wearing a navy blue dress with a small American flag pin on her collar. Sarah, thank goodness you're here early. Come, let me show you everything. Mrs. Fletcher led her through the growing crowd to the stage. You'll sit here, facing the audience. The microphone will pick up the piano sound just fine. I'll be standing right there, she pointed to a spot near the front, and I'll signal you when it's time for each song. Sarah climbed the 3 wooden steps to the stage and sat at the piano bench. From this height she could see the entire square. There were already about 100 people setting up chairs or hanging banners. More cars kept pulling into the parking areas around the square. She lifted the piano cover and pressed a few keys softly. The sound was different from her pianos at home, a bit more hollow, but still pleasant. The piano was slightly out of tune, but not enough to matter. She played a quiet scale to warm up her fingers. "Sounds good," said a man climbing onto the stage behind her. He was setting up microphones for the speakers. "You nervous?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "Don't worry about it. Just pretend you're playing for your family. Most folks here are just grateful to have music. They're not looking for perfection." His words made Sarah feel slightly better. She had never thought about it that way before. These people weren't coming to judge her playing, they were coming to honor veterans and remember people who had died in wars. By 9:30, the square was filling up quickly. Sarah watched from her bench as families arrived with folding chairs and blankets. She saw elderly men wearing military caps and jackets covered with patches and pins. Some walked with canes or used wheelchairs. A few had oxygen tanks on small carts beside them. There were also middle-aged people, some in military uniforms and some in regular clothes. Sarah guessed these were veterans from more recent wars. Some of them had children with them, kids who looked excited to be part of something special, even if they didn't fully understand what it was about. What caught Sarah's attention most were the older women carrying folded American flags. These flags were the kind given to families when a soldier died, perfectly folded into triangles, and kept in wooden cases or held carefully in hands that had carried them for years. Sarah realized these women were mothers and wives who had lost someone in a war. One woman in particular made Sarah's chest feel tight. She looked to be in her 70s with gray hair and glasses. She was sitting in the front row, holding a folded flag against her chest with one hand and clutching a framed photograph with the other. Even from the stage, Sarah could see it was a picture of a young man in military uniform. The woman's eyes were already red from crying, and the ceremony hadn't even started yet. Next to her sat a man about Sarah's age in a wheelchair. He was wearing a purple heart pin on his jacket, which Sarah knew was given to soldiers who were wounded in battle. His eyes looked distant, as if he was seeing something from long ago instead of the crowd around him. At 5 minutes to 10, Mrs. Fletcher climbed onto the stage and tested the microphone. Her voice echoed across the square. "Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our annual Veterans Day ceremony." The crowd began to quiet down and find their seats. Sarah counted roughly 400 people, more than she had ever played for in her entire life. Her hands started to sweat, and she wiped them on her black dress. "We'll begin in just a moment with our national anthem," Mrs. Fletcher continued. "Please rise and join us in singing." People began standing up all across the square. Sarah saw the elderly woman with the flag struggle to get up while still holding her photograph. The man in the wheelchair sat straighter and placed his hand over his heart. Mrs. Fletcher looked at Sarah and nodded. "When you're ready," Sarah placed her hands on the piano keys. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling nervous, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. These weren't just random people who had come to hear music. These were veterans who had served their country. These were families who had lost fathers, sons, brothers, husbands. These were people who understood sacrifice in ways Sarah had never experienced. She thought about her grandfather, who had died when she was 12. He had fought in World War II but never talked about it much. Sarah remembered him sitting in his favorite chair, sometimes staring out the window with the same distant look she now saw on some of the faces in the crowd. Sarah took a deep breath and began to play the Star-Spangled Banner. Her fingers found the opening notes easily. She had played this song at countless school events and church services. The crowd began to sing along, their voices mixing together in the cool morning air. But as she played, Sarah noticed something different about this performance. Usually, when she played the national anthem, people sang it quickly, eager to sit down and get on with whatever event was happening. Today, people were singing slowly, meaningfully. Some of the veterans had tears in their eyes. The woman with the flag was barely singing at all. She was too emotional to get the words out. When the song ended and people began to sit down, Sarah kept her hands on the keys. She could feel that something important was happening here, something bigger than just a community ceremony. These people hadn't come just to fulfill a social obligation. They had come to remember, to honor, and to grieve. Mrs. Fletcher stepped back to the microphone. Thank you. Please be seated as we remember those who gave their lives in service to our country. We ask for a moment of silence accompanied by Amazing Grace. This was Sarah's big moment, the song that was supposed to be simple and understated. She looked out at the crowd one more time. The elderly woman was now crying openly, still holding the photograph of the young soldier. Other people throughout the crowd were wiping their eyes or staring at the ground. Sarah realized that playing a simple version of Amazing Grace suddenly felt wrong. These people deserved more than simple. They deserved music that honored the depth of their loss and the importance of their memories. She placed her fingers on the keys, ready to begin. But instead of starting with the basic melody she had practiced, Sarah found herself hesitating. Her heart was beating fast, not from nervousness now, but from a feeling she couldn't quite name. It was as if the moment was asking something more from her than she had planned to give. The silence stretched across the square as Sarah prepared to play. 400 people waited, many of them lost in their own memories of people who would never come home. And Sarah Martinez, the quiet piano teacher who had always played exactly what was expected, felt something stirring inside her that she had never experienced before. Sarah's fingers touched the piano keys and she began Amazing Grace the way she had practiced it 100 times. The melody was clean and simple, exactly what Mrs. Fletcher had asked for. But as she played the first few notes, Sarah kept looking at the faces in the crowd. The elderly woman in the front row had closed her eyes, but tears were still running down her cheeks. She held the photograph of the young soldier against her heart as if she could somehow bring him back through the music. Behind her, a man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap was staring at the ground, his hands clenched in his lap. Sarah had played Amazing Grace at many funerals before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about one person who had died peacefully in old age. This was about young people who had died in wars far from home, leaving behind families who would never stop missing them. As she continued playing the familiar melody, something strange began to happen. Her left hand, which usually just played simple chords, started adding notes she had never planned. The extra notes seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, as if her fingers knew something her mind idea in single quotes. Sarah had studied piano seriously when she was younger, before she decided to become a teacher instead of a performer. She remembered lessons about harmony and improvisation, techniques she hadn't used in years. Suddenly, those old skills were coming back to her fingers as if they had been waiting for the right moment. The simple chord progression she had practiced became richer and more complex. Her right hand continued with the main melody, but now her left hand was weaving in additional harmonies that made the song sound fuller, more emotional. The piano seemed to respond to her touch in a way it never had before. People in the crowd began to notice the change. Heads lifted, eyes opened. The music was still recognizably Amazing Grace, but it was becoming something more. Sarah found herself playing with dynamics she had never planned, making some phrases softer and more intimate, others stronger and more powerful. She thought about her grandfather again, and suddenly she was playing some of the jazz chords he used to love. He had been a piano player too before the war, and sometimes late at night he would play old songs with complex harmonies that made Sarah's mother roll her eyes. "Just show off music," she would say. But Sarah had always loved the way those chords sounded, sad and hopeful at the same time. Now, without even thinking about it, Sarah was using some of those same chord progressions. The song was becoming a conversation between different emotions, grief and comfort, loss and hope, memory and healing. Her fingers moved across the keys with a confidence she had never felt before. The woman with the photograph had opened her eyes and was staring at Sarah with surprise. It was as if the music was speaking directly to her, telling the story of her loss in a way that words never could. Other people in the crowd were having similar reactions, some crying more freely now, others leaning forward as if they needed to hear every note. Sarah realized she was no longer playing the four-verse version of Amazing Grace that she had practiced. She was extending phrases, repeating sections with variations, adding interludes between verses that gave people time to absorb the music. The song was growing into something much longer and more complex than anyone had expected, but instead of feeling nervous about changing the plan, Sarah felt more focused than she ever had in her life. It was as if she was channeling not just her own musical training, but the emotions of everyone sitting in front of her. The music was becoming a voice for things that couldn't be spoken. In the fourth verse, Sarah began to incorporate elements from other songs she knew. A phrase from Taps, the song played at military funerals, wove its way into the melody. A few measures later, she found herself playing a variation that reminded her of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. These weren't conscious choices. Her hands seemed to be making decisions on their own. The crowd was completely silent except for the occasional sound of someone crying. Even the children were still, somehow understanding that something special was happening. Sarah had never commanded an audience's attention like this before. Usually, when she played, people talked quietly or looked around. Today, every person in the square was focused entirely on the music. As she moved into what should have been the final verse, Sarah felt the song pulling her in a new direction. Instead of ending where she had planned, she began to play the melody one more time. But now it was higher, more triumphant. It was as if the song was moving from sorrow toward something that felt like celebration, not happiness exactly, but a recognition of the beauty and courage in the lives. Being remembered. Her grandmother had taught her that Amazing Grace was about redemption, about finding something good even in the worst circumstances. Today, Sarah was discovering what that really meant. The music wasn't trying to make the pain go away. It was honoring the pain and finding hope within it. The technical aspects of what she was doing would have impressed her old piano teacher. She was using advanced harmonic progressions, sophisticated rhythmic variations, and dynamic contrasts that she hadn't attempted since her college days. But more importantly, she was playing with an emotional depth that she had never accessed before. People in the audience were having reactions she had never seen to her playing. Some were swaying slightly with the music. Others had their eyes closed but were listening intently. The veterans in the crowd looked as if they were being transported to memories they had kept, locked away for years. Sarah realized that the moment of silence Mrs. Fletcher had requested was now stretching into several minutes, but nobody seemed to mind. The music had created its own time, its own space. It was as if the entire square had become a church, and Sarah was leading a service for the souls of the departed. As she approached what she sensed would be the real ending of the song, Sarah began to bring the dynamics down, making the music softer and more intimate. But even as it got quieter, it seemed to get more intense. The harmonies became more complex, the emotional weight heavier. The final phrase of the melody came, and Sarah played it with a tenderness she had never achieved before. The last chord hung in the air for a long moment, and then silence fell over the square. It was a different kind of silence than before, not empty but full. Full of memory, full of honor, full of love for people who were gone but not forgotten. Sarah's hands remained on the piano keys, trembling slightly. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had planned to play a simple 3-minute version of Amazing Grace. Instead, she had just performed an 8-minute musical journey that had taken both her and the audience to places they hadn't expected to go. Looking out at the crowd, Sarah saw that many people were crying openly now. But they weren't just tears of sadness. There was something else in their faces, relief maybe, or gratitude. It was as if the music had given them permission to feel everything they had been holding inside. The silence stretched on for nearly 30 seconds. Sarah began to worry that she had made a mistake, that she had gone too far beyond what was expected. But then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. And then the entire crowd erupted in applause, unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It wasn't polite ceremony applause. It was the kind of sustained, emotional applause that comes from deep appreciation. People were standing up, some wiping their eyes, others still crying. The woman with the photograph was clapping while holding the picture, as if she was applauding not just for Sarah, but for her son who would never hear music again. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the response. She had never experienced anything like this in 12 years of playing piano. She had somehow found a part of herself she didn't know existed, and in doing so, she had created something that touched people in ways she was only beginning to understand. The applause went on for almost 2 minutes. Sarah sat at the piano bench, feeling stunned by what had just happened. She had never received applause like this before. Not at church, not at school concerts, not at weddings. This was different. It came from a deeper place. Mrs. Fletcher walked over to the piano, her own eyes wet with tears. She put her hand on Sarah's shoulder and whispered, "That was extraordinary. I've never heard anything like it." Sarah looked out at the crowd. People were still standing, still clapping. Some were talking to each other with excited voices, pointing toward the piano. Others were hugging, as if the music had created connections between strangers. The elderly woman with the photograph was making her way toward the stage. Sarah watched her climb the steps slowly, still holding the framed picture of the young soldier. When she reached the piano, she looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "What you just did," the woman said, her voice shaking. "That was for my son Tommy. He died in Vietnam in 1971. He was only 20 years old." She held up the photograph so Sarah could see it clearly. "I come to this ceremony every year, but I've never felt like anyone really understood what we lost until today. Your music ... It told his story." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never had someone react to her playing like this. "I'm sorry for your loss," she managed to say. "Don't be sorry," the woman replied. "Be proud. You have a gift, and today you used it to honor people like Tommy. Thank you." As the woman walked away, other people began approaching the stage. A middle-aged man in military uniform shook Sarah's hand. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," he said. "That music captured things I could never put into words. How did you know?" Sarah wanted to explain that she hadn't planned any of it, that the music had seemed to play itself. But she could see that people needed to believe she had done it on purpose. They needed to believe that someone understood their experiences well enough to translate them into music. A young woman with a baby approached next. "My husband died in Iraq 2 years ago," she said quietly. "I haven't been able to cry about it since the funeral. But listening to you play just now, I finally could. Thank you for giving me that." One by one, people shared their stories with Sarah. She heard about brothers who never came home, fathers who had nightmares about wars they couldn't forget, and children who had grown up without parents they would never know. Each person seemed to feel that the music had been played specifically for them. After about 20 minutes, Mrs. Fletcher returned to the microphone to continue the ceremony, but the atmosphere had completely changed. What was supposed to be a formal, traditional event had become something more personal and emotional. When it came time for Sarah to play "God Bless America" at the end, she found herself improvising again, though not as dramatically as before. The crowd sang along with voices that sounded different than they had during the national anthem, warmer, more connected. When the ceremony ended, Sarah was surrounded by people who wanted to talk to her. Many asked if she gave piano lessons. Others wanted to know if she performed at other events. A few people asked if she had recordings they could buy, but what surprised Sarah most was a teenager with a smartphone who approached her as she was packing up her music. "I recorded part of your performance," the girl said. "I hope that's okay. My dad was here, he's a veteran, and he was so moved by your playing that he asked me to record it so he could hear it again." Sarah nodded, though she felt a little nervous about being recorded. She had never thought about her playing being preserved or shared beyond the people who were physically present. That evening, Sarah got a phone call from Mrs. Fletcher. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind, but I gave your phone number to a few people who asked about hiring you for other events. The response to your playing today was unlike anything I've seen in 15 years of organizing this ceremony." Over the next few days, Sarah's phone rang constantly. The American Legion post in the next town wanted her to play at their Veterans Day dinner. A family asked if she would play at their grandfather's funeral. He had been a World War II veteran. The local newspaper wanted to do an interview about her performance, but the most surprising call came on Thursday evening. A woman named Janet Mills introduced herself as a talent scout for a small recording company that specialized in patriotic and memorial music. "Someone posted a video of your performance online," Janet explained. "It's been shared thousands of times in just 3 days. People are calling it the most moving rendition of Amazing Grace they've ever heard. Would you be interested in recording an album?" Sarah was shocked. She had no idea that her performance had been recorded and shared on the internet. She asked Janet to send her the link so she could see it for herself. That night, Sarah sat at her computer and watched a video of herself playing at the Veterans Day ceremony. Someone had filmed it from the audience, and even though the image quality wasn't perfect, the audio was clear. Sarah could hear every note she had played, every harmonic variation, every dynamic change. But more than that, she could see the faces of the people listening. The video captured the elderly woman crying, the veterans standing straighter, the children sitting unusually still. It showed the moment when the applause began and went on and on. Sarah read some of the comments below the video. People were writing about their own experiences with loss and military service. Veterans from different wars were thanking her for honoring their service. Gold Star families, parents who had lost children in combat, were sharing how her music had made them feel understood. One comment particularly moved her. It was from a woman who wrote, "My son died in Iraq in 2008. I haven't been able to listen to music at his grave because everything seemed too happy or too sad. But this performance captures exactly how I feel, heartbroken but proud, grieving but grateful. Thank you for giving voice to what military families go through." By the end of the week, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times. Sarah started getting calls and emails from people all over the country. Veterans organizations wanted her to play at their events. Families invited her to perform at memorial services. Music teachers asked if she would give workshops on emotional interpretation. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the response. She had gone from being a small-town piano teacher who played simple accompaniments to being someone that people across the country wanted to hear perform. The transformation had happened in just 8 minutes of music, but it was changing her entire life. The recording company offered her a contract to make an album of patriotic and memorial songs. A veterans organization asked if she would go on a tour of military bases. A music therapy program wanted her to work with veterans who were struggling with post-traumatic stress. Sarah realized that her quiet life was about to change dramatically. But as she sat at her grandmother's piano, playing through Amazing Grace once more, she understood that the change had started long before the Veterans Day ceremony. It had started the moment she decided to trust her instincts and play from her heart instead of just following the plan. The simple tune was still there, underneath all the variations and embellishments. But now Sarah knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take something familiar and trusted, and allow it to become a vehicle for deeper truth and emotion. Her phone rang again, another invitation, another opportunity that had grown out of those 8 minutes when she had stopped playing it safe and started playing it real. Sarah smiled and answered the phone, ready to see where this new path would lead her. 6 months after the Veterans Day ceremony, Sarah's life looked completely different. She was sitting backstage at a military base in Texas, waiting to perform for 2,000 service members and their families. It was her 15th memorial service performance since that day in Millbrook, and she still felt nervous before each one. The commanding officer, Colonel Roberts, came to check on her. "How are you feeling, Miss Martinez?" The troops are really excited to hear you play. Word spreads fast in the military community about someone who understands what we go through. Sarah nodded, adjusting the sleeves of her black dress. She had bought 3 identical black dresses now since she was performing so often. I'm ready. Is there anything special I should know about today's service? We're honoring 5 soldiers who died in a training accident last month, the colonel explained. Their families flew in from all over the country. It means a lot to them that you're here. Sarah had learned that every memorial service was different, but they all had something in common: families trying to make sense of loss and communities trying to honor sacrifice. She had developed a reputation for being able to capture these feelings in her music. Though she still couldn't completely explain how she did it, the recording album had been released 3 months ago and was selling better than anyone expected. Music for Memory, Sarah Martinez Plays for Heroes, featured her versions of Amazing Grace, Taps, Going Home, and 7 other songs commonly played at military services. But these weren't just standard arrangements. Each one had been developed through her experiences playing for real families in real moments of grief. The album's success had surprised everyone, including Sarah. She had never imagined that her style of playing would appeal to people beyond those who were physically present at the ceremonies. But letters came from all over the world, from military families, from people who had lost loved ones to illness or accidents, from anyone who needed music that acknowledged pain while offering comfort. Sarah walked onto the stage and took her place at the grand piano. 2,000 people filled the base auditorium, and she could see many uniforms, many serious faces, many people who carried the weight of loss and service. In the front row, she spotted the families of the 5 soldiers being honored. They looked exactly like the families at every service she had played, proud, heartbroken, trying to be strong. She began with Amazing Grace, as she always did. But now, instead of feeling like she was improvising wildly, Sarah had learned to channel her emotional interpretation more deliberately. She had developed techniques for reading an audience, for understanding what kinds of musical choices would best serve the specific people in front of her during the performance. Sarah noticed a middle-aged woman in the 3rd row who reminded her of Mrs. Elizabeth Chun, the elderly woman from her first Veterans Day ceremony. Mrs. Chun had become something of a friend over the past months, often calling Sarah to share memories of her son Tommy or to tell her about other veterans events in the area. Just last week, Mrs. Chun had said something that stuck with Sarah. You know, dear, before I heard you play that day, I felt like Tommy's death was just a sad ending to his story. But your music helped me remember that his life was the important part. The music made me proud of him again instead of just sorry for him. That comment had helped Sarah understand what she was really doing with her performances. She wasn't just playing pretty music for sad occasions. She was helping people remember why their losses mattered, why the lives being honored had been valuable, why their grief was actually a form of love. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by Dr. Lisa Henderson, a music therapist who worked with veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Sarah, I've been following your work since the first video went viral. I wonder if you'd be interested in doing something different. I run a program that uses music to help veterans process their experiences. Most of our participants have been through traditional therapy, but they're still struggling. I think your approach to emotional music might help them in ways that talking hasn't. Sarah was intrigued. She had received many offers to expand her work, but most of them involved performing for larger audiences or recording more albums. This was the first time someone had suggested she might be able to help with healing instead of just commemorating. What would that involve? Sarah asked. Small group sessions. Maybe 8 to 10 veterans at a time. You would play, but also teach them to express their own experiences through music. Many of them have stories they've never been able to tell. Music might be a way for them to process things they can't put into words. Sarah agreed to try a pilot program. 2 weeks later, she found herself in a small room at a VA hospital with 9 veterans from different wars: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and one from the Gulf War. Most of them looked uncomfortable, as if they weren't sure why they were there. I know this might seem strange, Sarah began. You probably came here thinking you'd just listen to music. But I've learned that sometimes playing music, even simple melodies, can help us understand our own feelings better. She started by playing Amazing Grace in a very simple version, then asked if anyone wanted to try playing a few notes on the small keyboard she had brought. To her surprise, a young woman who had served in Afghanistan volunteered. I used to play piano when I was a kid, the woman said. Her name was Jennifer, and she had been injured by a roadside bomb 2 years earlier. I haven't touched a keyboard since I got back. Jennifer's fingers found the melody slowly, hesitantly. But as she played, something in her face began to change. She started adding small variations, just like Sarah had done that first day. Other veterans in the group watched intently, and Sarah could see that they recognized something in Jennifer's playing, the sound of someone trying to work through difficult emotions. Over the next hour, 6 of the 9 veterans tried playing. Some could only manage a few notes, others played simple melodies they remembered from childhood. But each one seemed to find something in the music that they couldn't find anywhere else, a way to express feelings that were too complicated for words. The program expanded quickly. Other VA hospitals wanted Sarah to start similar groups. Music therapy schools asked her to teach courses on emotional interpretation. Musicians who worked in hospitals and hospices requested workshops on her techniques. Sarah realized she had accidentally discovered something important about music and healing. It wasn't just about playing beautifully or technically well. It was about creating space for people to feel whatever they needed to feel, without judgment, without pressure to get better or move on. 9 months after that first Veterans Day performance, Sarah received a letter that made her cry. It was from Tommy Chin's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Chun, who had continued to attend every Veterans Day ceremony since their first meeting. Dear Sarah, the letter read, I wanted you to know that this year's ceremony was different for me. When you played Amazing Grace, I wasn't just thinking about Tommy being gone. I was thinking about how proud he would be of the young woman who has honored so many families like ours with her music. I was thinking about how your gift has helped people all over the country feel less alone in their grief. Tommy always wanted to make a difference in the world. Through your music, he still is. Sarah kept that letter in her piano bench, next to the sheet music for Amazing Grace. She had performed the song hundreds of times now, but it never felt routine. Each performance was different because each audience brought their own stories, their own needs, their own capacity for healing. The quiet piano teacher who had once been content to play simple accompaniments had become someone who helped people find hope in the middle of loss. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take something familiar, a well-known song, a traditional melody, and trust it to carry much more weight than it was ever designed to hold. Sarah's calendar was booked solid for the next 6 months with performances, workshops, and therapy sessions. Record companies wanted more albums, and a book publisher had approached her about writing a memoir. Every morning, she still woke up at 6 and practiced for an hour at her grandmother's piano before the day began. The piano was still slightly out of tune, and some of the keys still stuck occasionally, but it remained the place where Sarah felt most connected to the gift she had discovered. It was where she had learned that music could be more than entertainment, more than background sound, more than technical demonstration. Music could be a bridge between people who were in pain and people who understood that pain. It could be a voice for feelings that had no words. It could transform a simple tune into something that changed lives, healed hearts, and honored memories, and it had all started with one moment when Sarah Martinez decided to trust her instincts. Instead of playing it safe, when she chose to let her heart guide her fingers instead of just following the sheet music. That moment had redefined not just the song she was playing, but the entire course of her life.